Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 4, Episode 14 of History's Greatest Idiots, the show where we look back through all of human history and bring you examples of catastrophic, absolute stupidity and incredible mistakes so that you can take lessons from other people's mistakes and never repeat them again. But who are we kidding? We're humans. Mistakes are part of our DNA at this point, and we certainly enjoy making them. Joining me as ever is my amazing co-host, Derek. Derek, how are you doing, my man?
Doing really good. A little stuffy today. Allergy season, you know.
Yeah, allergy season. And apparently you were like on top of an open air bar and it was like blowing a gale and you basically got battered by all of the pollen in Arizona at one point.
So. Something like that. I'm so stuffy at one point. My eyes were congested. It was neat. Never had that happen before. It was great.
That's so rough. Isn't it weird how, like, as we're getting older, because I can remember being a teenager. I'm not going to say exactly what age, but I was drunk. And like, I can remember coming back to my friend's house. It must have been 3 o'clock in the morning. We'd been out drinking all day, and I made like a pot noodle, like a ramen thing. And while I wasn't looking, he poured a bunch of like fizzy cola in it, and I was like so drunk I just ate the whole thing. And I woke up the next morning and I was like, yeah, I'm good to go. Yeah, let's go and play football for 6 hours and stuff. But like now, like you and I, like you go out, you get blasted by pollen, you feel rough the next day. And like I barely, like, if I don't get 12 hours sleep, I feel like a zombie. So
yeah, I'm trying to figure out, like, I don't drink anymore. And I didn't drink, and I was hydrating.
Very
and
good.
I still feel hungover.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that might be just like, I was out, the sun had gone down, and I was outside for a few more hours. Like, my body just couldn't take it.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely a thing. And it was still like, I don't know, 100 million, 113 or something. And that's Fahrenheit, not... whoever's listening internationally is like, oh my God, it's on fire there.
Yeah, that's the point at which steel melts at that, to be honest. So yeah, that's kind of intense. I think I would struggle with that too. Toasterzoid, thank you for joining us live. It's really good to have you with us, and sorry about the yuckage right out of the gate. Also, I want to give a big shout out to our wonderful patrons who got a very special Never-Ending Tangent episode today, or was it today? It was today that I uploaded an hour and a half of me and Derek talking about like haircuts and elections and reacting to Jiminy Glick interviewing Bill Hader, which is really fun. So if you would like to join our wonderful patrons and go over there and watch exclusive content, including us reacting to stuff, exclusive podcast episodes, video podcast episodes, special gifts, behind the scenes stuff from our lives, scripts, and a whole bunch of other cool stuff on the way, including anniversary gifts for people. I need to print one of those out soon, actually. Please go to patreon.com/history's greatest idiots. You can sign up there, sling us a little bit of cash, and you can become a lifetime member. Who you interviewed Bill Hader? No, Jiminy Glick, who is a fictional character portrayed by the genius Martin Short, who dressed up in this incredible suit and interviewed Bill Hader and completely destroyed him, like broke him down as a human being to the point where he couldn't control his laughter. And Martin Short didn't break character at all. No. It was incredible to see.
Yes. So I was laughing my ass off.
Yeah, it was amazing. So we've recorded our reactions to that over on the Patreon if you want to go and see that. Also, we are available on Instagram. If you just search for History's Greatest Idiots, we will be on Instagram. And also, if you want to watch our videos on YouTube, go to YouTube and search for History's Greatest Idiots. It's right there. All of our wonderful videos, and yeah, you can follow us and subscribe. And I can't remember what we were on now. I think we lost a couple of subscribers, but yeah, 182 subscribers. I'm very pleased with that. So
yeah,
very happy. Yeah,
it's been up and down, but you know,
yeah, we got a bit of hate for the Henry Ford video, but you know, those people seem to have gone and started shouting at someone else now. So yeah, we're fine, back to normal.
yeah.
Yeah, me and Derek have done quite a lot of recording. We've got another recording coming up next weekend, so we'll probably be doing at least one, possibly two, because there's a bunch of stuff coming up. But we've got kind of an interesting episode this week. I've got an event as opposed to a person or people, so you'll have to judge on that one, Derek. But can you tell me about your super special idiot?
Okay, so like I was saying, I was on that rooftop bar in downtown Phoenix, and that reminded me of like a story that I heard when my wife Sandra and I were on this tour in downtown Phoenix just a few weeks back. We did this historic haunted ghost hunting tour. We went walking around with like an EMF reader and like stuff. And they told this story about a person that died right near that corner of that hotel rooftop bar. And that inspired me to cover this guy on the show today. I want to tell you about the dude that inspired that funny little cop movie TV show element that we all know and love so much here in the States, and really expect that if we ever get arrested, it's going to happen exactly like that. You know, the whole you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say, that guy.
Yeah. The Miranda rights.
Yeah. It's inspired by a real life case by a real life guy here in the state of Arizona.
Oh, okay. I mean, obviously I knew it came from somewhere, but I didn't know it was an Arizona thing.
It was. He was born Ernesto Arturo Miranda, not too far from where I live here in Mesa, Arizona, on the March 9th, 1941. And right from the get-go, he had a pretty rough life. His mom died when he was just 6 years old, and that put him in the care of his father, who immigrated to the U.S. from Mexico just before he was born. And his dad remarried to a woman that he didn't get along with.
Right. That's not good.
But he also didn't get along with his dad or his brothers or most other people, I guess, from most accounts.
Sounds like his mother's death seems to have turned him into a bit of a loner, maybe alienated him a little bit. That does happen sometimes when you lose a parent, for sure.
It definitely could have been a triggering moment, but it started early, the trouble in his life. 1954, he's in 8th grade at the Queen of Peace Grammar School in Mesa when he was convicted of his first crime. It was a felony burglary. He was sentenced to probation 1 year. He dropped out of school and then was convicted of another burglary and sentenced to a year in reform school. So back to school of sorts. Not really school.
Yeah. No.
Clearly, he's terrible at crime.
Yeah, it straight away, like out the gate, he's not learning anything.
Yeah, or at least burglary.
Yeah.
He keeps getting caught. He's not letting that stop him, and he's escalating. In 1956, a few years after he's released from the Arizona State Industrial School for Boys, that's a reform school they shipped him off to. If you're sensitive to the R word for sexual assault, that's what he tried to do to a young lady right after he got out. They picked him up on that, sent him back to the reform school for 2 more years. I'm going to say that school wasn't reforming him very well.
No, not at all.
But he turned 17. They let him out again. And this time he took off, went to L.A., where he's there for a few months, and he got arrested for armed robbery.
Holy shit, he's really escalating fast.
Yeah, but he wasn't convicted on that one.
Oh.
He was convicted for violating curfew, lack of supervision, and being a peeping Tom.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. Okay. So they put him in the custody of the California Youth Authority. He was in there for 45 days, turned 18. They shipped him back to Arizona, or we're like, okay, get out. And then he moved back to Arizona.
Yeah.
He enlisted in the Army, where that's when his life completely turned around and he became an upstanding citizen. He was falsely arrested, ended up in a Supreme Court case where, no, that isn't.
No, that felt too good to be true. Yeah, was like, I was hopeful for a second, but then I was like, knowing what we know about the people we cover on this podcast, that's highly unlikely. That's like Dick Cheney retiring from politics and becoming a podcaster and a really great person. It wasn't going to happen.
If anybody was like believing me there, that was like horrible acting. So if you believed me, you're nuts. He enlisted in the Army. He was there for about in total 15 months.
Okay, he lasted longer than I thought he would.
But he was only there for a few months before he went AWOL.
Oh.
And while he was doing that, he got arrested for being a peeping Tom.
Jesus, like really specific crimes with this guy.
Yeah, and he ended up 6 months hard labor in the military stockade at Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
He's kind of getting off light for a lot of these at this point.
Mm-hmm. You know? He got a dishonorable discharge in July of 1958 at the age of 19. So out of the 15 months in the U.S. Army, 6 of them were in jail.
Jesus.
From there, his dazzling life of crime continued, and he was ordered to undergo psychiatric counseling. But he only attended one session.
Yeah,
and then he kind of drifted through the Southwest. After the Army, he was in jail in Texas for vagrancy and not having money or a place to live.
Is that a crime, being homeless
in the 50s in Texas? I mean, the new Supreme Court decision, they can punish you for being homeless now, for sure.
That's terrible. That's really fucked.
Anyway, so he was arrested for that in the 50s in Texas, and then he was arrested in Nashville for driving a stolen car.
Jeez.
That he stole in a different state, so that was a federal felony that ended him up in federal prison for 1 year and a day in Ohio and then Lompoc, California.
Okay.
At 21, he got out and took up with Twyla Hoffman, who was a 29-year-old woman with a son and a daughter.
Okay.
He stayed out of jail for a little while, living with her.
Okay, good.
Working odd jobs, making a living. They had a daughter together. He landed this night job working the dock at a produce company in Phoenix.
Okay.
Moved the family back out to Mesa, which is like a suburb of Phoenix.
Right, yeah.
She started working at a nursery school. And then on March 13th, 1963, his life really, really, really changed, because that's when his truck was spotted and his license plate was recognized by the brother of an 18-year-old kidnapping and rape victim.
Oh, shit.
And his description of his car and partial license plate was given to the Phoenix police officers who confronted him. And then they took him in for questioning. He volunteered to go in for questioning. He participated in a lineup. At the time, he was just a person of interest and wasn't in custody. But after the lineup, he kind of offhandedly asked, how'd I do? And they were like, oh, she ID'd you, and arrested him, and then took him into the interrogation room. And then after 2 hours of interrogation, some of it was about not that case,
right?
Like a different one that he was convicted of also.
Okay.
They made him write a handwritten confession that at the top of the sheet said, this statement has been made voluntarily of my own free will, with no threats, coercion, or promises of immunity, and with full knowledge of my legal rights, understanding any statement I make can and will be used against me. After confessing to the officers, he was taken to meet the victim for voice identification, and then he said, that girl, and his voice matched. And,
holy shit. That's a lot happening right there. That sounds super suspicious, though, the thing at the top of the paper. Like, yeah.
They wanted it to be like bulletproof.
Right.
I mean, like, kind of, in my opinion, not a legal opinion, that at the top of the page, if you read that, means that you were kind of informed of your rights in writing. You wrote your rights a little bit.
Yeah. I think
they didn't tell him he needed a lawyer, or he had the right to a lawyer.
Yeah, I feel like that's the problem with the written thing. And this is one of the reasons I love that we now have body cams, is that you get like a chain of events. So you get person incites crime or is arrested. You then hear or see one of the officers reading them, speaking their Miranda rights, and them then agreeing, do you understand? Yes. Okay. So you've got that kind of chain of events. Whereas if you've just got a piece of paper with someone's written confession and then a thing at the top's like, what sequence, what order, like, were they promised something and then you've put that at the top of the paper later? It's like, it's difficult to know, I think.
Right. Yeah, you could have wrote that in later.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and I mean, despite that statement at the top of the sheet with the confession, he actually wasn't informed to the right to have the attorney present, nor was he told that he could stay shut up.
Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah, and that's one of the great things about the Americans. We have a similar thing over in the UK. We have a thing called a no comment interview, where you can literally just say no comment to everything, including what's your name. You know, like you can just literally say no comment, and they'll try and antagonize people in interviews to try and get stuff out of them. But basically, by doing a no comment interview, the person who's been arrested is challenging the police to present evidence to prove their statements instead of trying to get them to admit essentially what they've done. Whereas, like, I guess in America, it's you don't say anything, you just literally remain silent. So, or you read a statement at the start of the interview saying my client will be exercising his right to remain silent throughout this entire process. So yeah. I that's a very important legal precedent to not be told that, and possibly because he's young and not super well informed about the law, that's like a huge barrier to justice there.
I mean, he dropped out of school at eighth grade.
It's crazy.
Started his life of crime.
Really
great at.
Yeah, he's really bad at it. And actually, life was going reasonably well for him up until this point. So I'm interested to know what happens next with this.
Well, his 73-year-old court-appointed public defender, Alvin Moore, was assigned to represent him at trial in mid-June, objected to the entering of his confession, but he was overruled. And then mostly because of that confession, Ernesto was convicted and sentenced to 20 to 30 years in prison on both of the charges.
Yeah, those are serious charges.
That's then Moore appealed to the Arizona Supreme Court, but they upheld the conviction. Then the Miranda filed as a pauper to submit a plea for come on, Latin. Here we go. Writ of certiorari, or request for review of his case by the U.S. Supreme Court in June of 1965.
Okay.
And after Alvin Moore was unable to continue representing him because of health reasons, the ACLU stepped in with Robert Cochran, Johnny Flynn. And they were doing it pro bono for him with John Frank and Paul Ulrich.
Big guns right there.
Yeah. They wrote a 2,500 word petition that the Supreme Court accepted in November 1965. They agreed to hear his case, along with 3 other similar cases, to clear up confusion from a previous decision on Escobedo versus Illinois. From I skipped the date. In January 1966, Flynn and Frank submitted the argument that Miranda's Sixth Amendment right to counsel had been violated by the Phoenix Police Department. Then 2 weeks later, the state of Arizona responded by asserting that his rights had not been violated. So they're like, his rights were violated. No, they weren't. Yes, they were. No, they weren't. First day of the case was February 1966. So it's like a year of going back and forth.
Wow.
The attorney that spoke. Yeah, exactly.
That's what I was saying. Amazing.
John Flynn for Ernesto said he outlined the case and stated that he hadn't been advised of his right to remain silent when he was arrested or questioned. He also added that the Fifth Amendment argument, he added that as his Fifth Amendment argument. He contended that Miranda was an emotionally disturbed man with limited education and shouldn't be expected to know his Fifth Amendment to not incriminate himself.
I agree with that statement. I mean, all evidence backs that up, really. He is definitely emotionally damaged, and he is certainly lacking in education of what his rights are. So, yeah, that's a fair point, 100%.
Then the prosecuting attorney, Gary Nelson, spoke for the people of Arizona, arguing that it wasn't the Fifth Amendment issue that was in question, but an attempt to expand the Sixth Amendment Escobedo decision that they were arguing, saying that the justices need to clarify the position, not push the limits too far, because forcing the police to advise suspects of their rights would obstruct public safety.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
That's a complete load of absolute horseshit right there. That's like you as the police need cut and dry cases, right? We don't need miscarriages of justice. That itself is a significant danger to public safety. Never mind this, like, you know, just don't tell them their stuff. It'll be absolutely fine. No, you absolutely have to make sure that everyone is aware of their rights at all times. It's absolutely important to every case.
I think it's a big part of, I mean, even the people accused of a crime are the public.
Exactly. Like, they haven't been convicted of anything yet.
Yeah.
So yeah.
The second day of arguments concerned the other case, the other two cases that they were going over. The Chief Justice, Earl Warren, wrote an opinion in the Miranda versus Arizona for the deciding in favor that stated the person in custody prior to interrogation must be clearly informed that he has the right to remain silent, that anything he says will be used against him in court. He must be clearly informed that he has the right to consult a lawyer and have the lawyer with him during interrogation, and that if he is indigent, a lawyer will be appointed to represent him.
Yeah, it's super basic stuff, and that should be explained to everyone in whatever language they're, fluent in. You need to make sure that absolutely 100% happens. And I'm glad that Judge Warren, Earl Warren, quite a famous name in legal circles. Yeah, I'm glad he said that, because you should be having that at every opportunity, really.
Yeah, and that opinion was released on June 13th, 1966, and then immediately printed out onto a bunch of different cards and handed out to police departments throughout the United States for their officers to recite when arresting people.
Good. Yeah.
And
tattoo it on their hands. Jesus.
Yeah, it actually reads really smooth. I would like to read it, but I'm not going to, because I just half-ass read it. But at the end, they add, "Do you understand these rights as I've read them to you?" So that, like you were saying on the body cam, you have that chain of events. You have that
recognition, acknowledgement that it's understood. Because if they don't say yes, then you've got other problems. If you then arrest them, if they say what, or they don't respond because they're semi-conscious or whatever it might be, that's a whole other gray area right there. So yeah, that whole reading it to them clearly, slowly, making sure they're focusing on what's happening, that's a really important part of the legal process. And it stops so many miscarriages of justice. It's such a basic thing, but if you're just grabbing people off the streets and throwing them in a cell and interrogating them, then all sorts of crazy shit can happen, and you're probably never going to solve any crimes that way, because you'll get the wrong people. So
yeah, Pretty much. Like you end up like places like Russia. And,
yeah.
No. Ooh, wait. Oh, we're banned there.
Yeah. Let's say the USSR, but probably Russia as well.
Yeah.
But also there was a famous case in Iceland where there was a crime. I think a guy was murdered or something. The police arrested like 4 different people, and they held them without trial because there was no like you have 24 hours to hold someone and then you have to release them or charge them. They held them for weeks and essentially just interviewed them incessantly, all hours of the day for weeks. Basically torture at that point, and all of them eventually confessed to something they'd never done because they'd been held for so long. And also I think they were promised that they'd go free, and then they were sent to prison for decades. And there was a documentary made about it on Netflix. Terrible injustices there.
Yeah.
Don't want that.
Well, no, absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, where was I?
Miranda. Yes.
Yeah. So the Supreme Court decision invalidated his conviction, and because of the tainted use of the confession, the state of Arizona had to retry him. And at the second trial, his confession wasn't introduced, and he was convicted again anyway and sentenced to 20 to 30 years. Haha. Because Twyla Hoffman came in and gave some testimony that didn't help him at all.
Sure. I mean, it sounds like he probably did it from what we can tell.
So.
He was convicted, but that contribution is massive.
Yeah.
To other people. Wow. So did he stay in prison for the full term?
He was paroled in 1972, and he kind of tried to turn away from his life of crime and become an entrepreneur.
All right, good for him. Yeah.
So what he did was he started up this neat business of selling autographed Miranda rights cards for $1.50.
No, that's hilarious.
No, yeah, he did that. That was a thing that he did. It didn't go so great for him.
Not surprised. Who's going to buy that in the 70s?
I don't think very many people. And $1.50 in the 70s is kind of a lot of money.
Yeah. I bet they're probably worth quite a bit of money now, though. You know, from a legal perspective, maybe.
I know there's probably some that are worth a lot of money, and I'll tell you about those. He was arrested a whole bunch of more times for minor possession, driving offenses, and lost his license. Then he was arrested for possessing a gun, which you can't do while you're a felon or on parole.
Right. Okay.
So he went back to prison for a year.
Oh, wow. A whole year for that. Blimey.
Yeah. Okay. And then January 31st, 1976, he stopped into this local watering hole called the Amapola Bar in downtown Phoenix on 2nd Street in Monroe.
Okay.
And then a fight broke out at some point where he got stabbed.
Okay.
He was pronounced dead at Banner Good Samaritan Medical Center at just 34 years old. Wow. At the time of his death, he was carrying several signed Miranda cards.
Wow. Okay.
Now, are you ready for some irony frosting here?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. The dude that was suspected of handing the knife to the guy that stabbed him invoked his Miranda rights when the cops showed up and refused to talk to the cops, so he was never charged. Yeah.
Amazing.
The guy that did stab him, 23-year-old Ezekiel Perez. He was formally charged in February of 76, but he took off to Mexico and was never seen again.
Yeah,
by authorities. I'm sure people seen him.
I'm sure someone's seen him in some part of Mexico, Guadalajara or something. Yeah.
Now, odd thought that I had about this is the dude that invoked his Miranda rights. What do you think the odds were that he was carrying a signed Miranda card? And maybe the fight was about how much the asshole was charging for it.
There's a strong possibility there for me, right?
That's what I was thinking.
That makes sense.
$1.50, man.
That's you could get 2 beers for that back then, right? That's quite a lot of money in the 70s.
I think you could get a 12-pack for $1.50 in the 70s. Shit.
God damn, yeah. You're right. That's a lot of money. So yeah, he seems to have had go on, sorry.
Well, I was gonna say, interesting side note is the friends that I was hanging out with on that bar that brought up this whole story, they were like, hey, that Gary Nelson that prosecuted that case, I used to sing the national anthem with his son. I'm like, holy crap! What kind of small world Canadian Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation crap is this? So
amazing.
I had to do this story, and
Yeah.
I got to know what you think about this Ernesto Miranda here, man.
I mean, it's kind of an amazing story, right? And it is very tragic because this is someone who obviously had a very difficult life and who never really got themselves out of it, right? Their life continued to be difficult and tragic for the entirety of its very short and sad run. He doesn't sound like a particularly, I can't say good or bad person, but he doesn't sound like he's particularly well adjusted, and that's clearly influenced his criminal behavior. He never seems to have gotten straight in any sense of the word. So it's very sad, but the influence he's had on the American justice system as a result of, you know, very basic interactions with the police, I think is profound and incredibly important. However much he kind of was aware of it and what he was doing at the time is, you know, obviously he started signing Miranda rights cards when he got out, but like, I don't know if he realizes the kind of positive impact he's had on the US justice system in the time since that case. It's a landmark case in the history of your country, you know, not just like it's up there as one of the most important changes in law, up there with any kind of legislation, really. So
absolutely. And I think, though, I mean, obviously Cochran and them, but Alvin Moore is like, I think should be a more well-known name for his idea to say, hey, I'm the one that, like, he's the one that brought the case initially. Like, hey, this is rights that should be protected. This has got to go all the way. But
completely,
that's a side note, I guess.
It's kind of like the statue of Karl Marx. Like, people realized that you couldn't put up a statue of Karl Marx without Friedrich Engels, the guy who co-wrote the Communist Manifesto, but also bankrolled Karl Marx's entire life because he was a lazy fuck who never wanted to work. But I feel like Miranda himself was an idiot, but a lot of this is a really difficult environment that he never really had the chance to escape. Some pretty horrific crimes, though. So I'm gonna have to go high. I think probably like an 86 for that.
That's pretty fair, I think.
Yeah, I like that he tried at various points to do something a bit different, but I don't know if he ever really was going to be the kind of person that could get away from that. It's just a shame. I feel like if he'd lived like another 10, 15 years, maybe, come into the 80s with, the expansion of media and the recognition of different things, I feel like maybe he could have found an avenue that would have taken him away from that life. But he just sounds like someone who was always surrounded by trouble. So,
yeah. And I mean, without this case or that arrest, nobody ever knew who he was.
He'd just be another
life, like not average, but I mean, just a troubled life.
Yeah, and it is kind of sad, but the legacy he leaves behind with the Miranda rights thing is so important. So for that, he definitely deserves some positive recognition. I'm really glad that someone recognized that there was a big miscarriage of justice here and chased that, because it's going to help a lot of people. But him himself, like, he was just kind of just a troubled man that never really escaped that life. So you have to go high. But his legacy is one of the strongest that we've had from any of these idiots, because he leaves behind the thing he did. The one positive thing he did in the world has had huge, great knock-on effects for people. Unfortunately, his actual life is just a mess, sadly. So,
and ended
short, sad mess. But his legacy is now that name, Miranda rights. So that's good. Let's focus on that. That's the good part of the story. So from one person who is kind of really only known for like one major thing to a group of people who are known for a bunch of things, but one incident in particular ties them all together. And it's kind of never going to be forgotten. This has been covered quite a bit in mainstream media recently, and I know that wrestling themed episodes aren't always our most popular or most listened to, but this specific event is so crazy that I kind of had to cover it. It was covered recently in an episode of The Dark Side of the Ring, and it's been legend in wrestling circles for 20 years. It's fucking insane. It's a mixture of hilariousness, tragedy, sadness, criminality, all in the span of 6 hours, involving multiple people. So let me tell you now the story of the plane ride from hell, as it's been known. Yeah, this is one of those things that happened in wrestling that, as an insider, you're like, okay, I kind of understand now why I'm fascinated with wrestling, because this wouldn't happen in any other sport or industry. It's so crazy and so unique that it will never happen again. But I just can't get over it. I have to tell you about it. Anyway, before I get into it, I need to give big credit to ProWrestlingStories.com, who compiled, because there's a bunch of websites out there that talk about this, but getting like a sequence of events of what happened on this flight and leading up to it and after it is very difficult, because you've got multiple different people's stories, even though there were hundreds of witnesses to this. But yeah, they pulled together a really good sequence of events there, and I have pulled a little bit from, well, quite a lot from their article. So thank you, ProWrestlingStories.com. They're a great website. So on the 4th of May 2002, the WWE, then the WWF, held its third annual Insurrection pay-per-view from Wembley Arena in London, England. It's a little arena next to the stadium. So, you know, if you're not going to be able to sell 90 to 100,000 tickets for Wembley Stadium, there's the arena next door. It's got like a 12,500 capacity, you know, so your smaller concerts or something like that, you're going to hold it in the arena. Plus it's indoors, whereas Wembley is open top, so it's an open air venue, difficulty with sound and stuff like that. So yeah. A little over 9,000 people attended the pay-per-view in Wembley, London that night. It was a fairly average WWE pay-per-view at the time, where nothing of any major consequence happened, which was usually the case with foreign pay-per-view events until very recently, because they would be broadcast at different times, and it meant that the main hardcore of the audience over in the States and Canada wouldn't be watching it live. So they didn't kind of want to upset them by having stuff happen when they weren't necessarily paying top dollar for it. So it's like a C-level pay-per-view. It's not like a, you know, oh my God, a WrestleMania, like a big name pay-per-view. It's like, we'll go over to the UK, we'll get a bunch of money because you only go there like once or twice a year. We can charge like $400 for a front row seat, and we'll get 9,000 people, and we'll make a bit of money, and we'll give them a pay-per-view, and they'll have a great time. So it was one of those events. I'm just going to list a bunch of people who were present on the card and some of the issues they were dealing with at the time, including, I should point out as well, 2002 have been kind of the culmination of the Attitude Era. They were working 4 house shows a week plus a television taping. So they were working 5-6 days a week on the road constantly. All of these guys were injured in some form or another. All of them. Whether it was back, knee, shoulder, elbow, whatever it is, they're all carrying some sort of injury.
That's a lot of abuse, man.
It's a lot of abuse. And some of these guys are getting old, so their bodies are starting to fall apart. But I'm just going to list the people involved in this flight and this thing. Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig, who was addicted to cocaine, had problems with booze, and was known to be incredibly mischievous. He was one of the worst ribbers and prankers in the history of wrestling. Then we've got Dustin Goldust Rhodes, who was on a number of pills at the time, also booze. Then you have X-Pac, who is on a bunch of pills and other drugs and booze. You have Rob Van Dam, who is the biggest pothead in all of wrestling history, bar none. He's got an entire gimmick around it. That's how much he loves weed. Eddie Guerrero, who was a recovering alcoholic and pill addict at the time, but he was in recovery. John Bradshaw Layfield, JBL, who would just love the booze. Jeff Hardy, just a cocktail of drugs in his system at the time, and unfortunately until very recently. Scott Hall, booze and drugs all at the same time. Ric Flair, booze constantly for 45, 50 years. And producer Michael P.S. Hayes, who was like a pretty heavy alcoholic at the time. So that's just some of the people involved in this event. Sorry, go on.
So it's a party on this plane, and then one boring guy that used to be fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Eddie Guerrero going, oh man, I don't want to get back into this. So the WWE had taken to chartering Boeing 747s for their foreign tours, so that the entire crew of wrestlers, agents, caterers, makeup people, construction crew, production crew, producers, and senior management could all fly on the same plane instead of like multiple different flights, and you might have someone missing their connection, or a flight might get delayed out of Atlanta. Whereas if they're all in the same place, you got them all on the same flight that you've chartered, it's kind of easier to control that chaos, sort of. Anyway, so usually with the wrestlers would be up in business and first class, because they're just physically bigger people and they're all injured, so it just makes sense to give them more leg room, basically.
Yeah,
you've got guys who are 6'4" and above, like The Undertaker and stuff, who's 6'8", and all of these giants. 300 pounds. You got to give them a first class seat because they physically can't fit into anything. Andre the Giant used to get 2 first class seats. That's how big he was. So, anyway, it was just better to get them all on this flight, and all of the production people and the crew would be back in economy plus. But it'd be comfortable because even though it's a Boeing 747, there's only about 150 people on this flight. So, and the Boeings at the time, they could hold like 220, 230 people. So, you've got space for like your luggage and stretching out and stuff like that. So
yeah, middle seats are empty.
Yeah, you got a bit of leg room. You can stretch out. You can push your seat back, whatever it might be. Everyone's pretty comfortable at this point. On a flight the previous year, WWE owner Vince McMahon, Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle, and The Undertaker had already gotten into trouble for some in-flight shenanigans involving actual amateur wrestling. The situation originated when McMahon who'd been pestering Kurt Angle for months, had snuck up behind him and taken him down from behind at a live event before jumping up and immediately claiming that he was now a better wrestler than the Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle, because he's a fucking troll at this point in his life, Vince McMahon. Funny. Yeah, McMahon continued to do this for months and months and months, just like sneaking up behind Kurt Angle and trying to double leg him. And Kurt, after the first time, was like just throwing him around the place. It was hilarious. Eventually, Kurt saw his opportunity for revenge when a slightly drunk McMahon was standing in the aisle and was trying to do the same thing again. Vince kept trying to take him down, Matt Hardy said. There was one point where he grabbed me and said, "Hardy, distract the son of a bitch. Tell him to come to you." And he was going to jump out from behind, like where the stewardess stands. I said, "What am I going to get out of this?" And Vince said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll take care of you." Then I went and I was walking through, and as I was doing this, I said, "Hey, Kurt, come down here." And then he whispered to Kurt Angle, "By the way, watch out, Vince is going to try and jump you from behind." He immediately grasped on his boss. And Vince grabbed him, and Kurt immediately turned him around. Every single time Vince tried to grab Kurt, Kurt would take him down instantly. Every time I saw it, and I saw it happen multiple times throughout that specific night. So he did it multiple times on this plane, and Kurt would just take him down and pin him. This one time though, Kurt grabbed Vince and took him down and pinned his ass on the floor. Eventually they did this in the vicinity of a sleeping and incredibly grumpy Undertaker, who was out cold. He was injured. He had like an elbow injury at the time, And he woke up to see Kurt Angle pinning the Undertaker's friend and boss Vince McMahon to the floor, and assumed that they were fighting. He assumed that this was like a full-on brawl that was happening. So the Undertaker, who is legit 6'8" and 280 pounds, has 20 years of BJJ training. This is a lot of people don't know this. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He grabbed Kurt from behind and slapped on a rear naked choke onto the Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle, and eventually Kurt Angle realized that the Undertaker wasn't going to let go. So he dropped Vince McMahon, and the Undertaker eventually let go of the chokehold when Kurt was tapping. And both McMahon and Angle explained that it was just a playful prank and that they were just having fun to the Undertaker. So the Undertaker began swearing at them and telling them off and telling them to shut the fuck up and calm down, and then sat back down in his seat and went to sleep.
Yeah. Quit being children.
Like a grumpy bear who's hibernating. So, yeah. And he shouted out his boss. Because the Undertaker's got this really weird place in wrestling history. He's considered what's known as a locker room leader. And he would mete out justice to wrestlers who were misbehaving or not like carrying their load, or maybe they'd kind of fucked around and caused some issues. So they would go to what's known as wrestler's court, and the Undertaker would be the judge, and charges would be brought up against them by JBL. And usually, I mean, if you'd been called to wrestler's court, you were going to be found guilty, basically. And the punishment was usually buy the Undertaker a bottle of Jack Daniels and buy everyone a beer, and then you can go free. So yeah,
it's like a kangaroo court. I think
essentially, yeah. But also it's like kind of a subtle, friendly way of saying, listen, you're fucking up. Get your shit together, but also buys beer. So this had already happened on a previous flight, and I'm not 100% sure about rules of air travel, but I'm pretty certain that amounts to a federal crime, right? Kind of fake play fighting in the middle of an airplane. Is that?
I mean, if you've chartered the plane and the people that are running the show don't care, but I mean,
guess so. Yeah.
It seems dumb as hell.
It does seem dumb, and it was dumb.
Unstable.
It seems dangerous, and unfortunately, because the boss has done it, he's kind of setting a precedent for behavior.
Oh no!
And he's sober as a bird, right? But a year later, all these injured, tired guys who've just done a tour of the UK and probably Europe and culminated in a pay-per-view, they all now understand what Vince is doing. He's constantly trying to jump Kurt Angle. So so they're like, well, if he can do it, then fuck it. Anyway, the event that would become known to history as the plane ride from hell would make that specific incident look like a mild indiscretion. After everyone had boarded the plane, the pilot announced that the flight had been delayed by an hour, but they didn't want to disembark the aircraft because it would mean like a bunch of technical stuff, and it would mean more delays. So in an attempt to placate the exhausted wrestlers on board, the organizers of the flight decided that they would have an open bar for the entirety of the flight. And from that moment onwards, what the fuck were they thinking?
That's a bad idea.
Yeah. What? And it's a Boeing 747. So it's the biggest aircraft in the world at the time. It has a full complement of food and drink, but there's only like 2/3 of the people on board that would normally be there. And also, not everyone that goes on these flights drinks, but and it was basically only the wrestlers that were drinking. There were 30 guys who got into the booze, and it got bad quick from there. Sean X-Pac Waltman said something was brewing. Everybody had their different little deals they were doing. Some people were doing GHB, gamma hydroxyburic acid. Some were getting pilled up, whatever. You could buy GHB in the health food store at the time. It was legal. So that was the reason everyone was doing it, but it fucked you up, is what he said.
Cool.
Yeah. Please don't buy that. That's not a good thing to do. Buy health store stuff and get completely fucked up. Events started more or less innocently when Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig, and Scott Hall, who were buddies from like 20 years prior, got hold of shaving cream canisters and proceeded to run around tagging multiple people who were already like strapped in. So this is like they've still got the the belt buckle sign thing on, so they just took theirs off and ran around, just started spraying people and tagging them, and yeah, harmless-ish, really. Annoying, but it's not gonna like ruin anyone's day. And it's also in line with everything that Kurt Hennig was known for, because he was a notorious pranker, ribber, and mostly harmless stuff designed to raise everyone's morale and give them a laugh. But nobody did anything. Other people were laughing, and no one like kind of, all right, guys, calm down, put your seatbelts back on. Nobody said anything, so it kind of escalated from there. Things started to get much more serious when, according to Shane Ryan of Grantland.com, wrestlers on the flight passed several syringes to the flight attendants and asked them to surreptitiously dispose of them and to not tell management about the multiple syringes that they'd just been handed. Yeah. I don't want to speculate what was in those needles. Like, this is at the time when steroid use was really rampant in wrestling. Everyone was on the juice. But given what you're about to hear, I suspect that there was more in those needles than just steroids. So
okay.
Yeah. The first major incident set the tone for the rest of the flight. Kurt Hennig, who at this point is 42 years old, he's a very established veteran, and a very young Brock Lesnar, who's 24, were close friends and who were traveling together at the time. Kurt Hennig essentially took him under his wing and was showing him how to behave and be like a big star and how to behave on the road and stuff. The only problem is Kurt Hennig pranks everyone all the time, constantly, even when he should really stop. So they were both from Minnesota and both had major amateur wrestling backgrounds. So they had quite a lot to connect with. And Kurt was actually like a really quiet country boy away from wrestling. And Brock Lesnar basically owns a ranch now. That's like his thing. He throws hay bales around when he's back on the farm. His daughter is now a national collegiate level shot putter, and she looks exactly like him. It's fucking amazing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she's a big girl. And I've seen her shot put. She's fucking launching this thing. The genetics in the Lesnar family are fucking scary. Anyway, they became really close. So close, in fact, that Brock Lesnar went out of his way to look after. He really became very fond of Kurt Hennig's family at the time, because Kurt Hennig was a really good, really into being a good dad and stuff like that. And Brock Lesnar connected with Joe's teenage son, with Kurt Hennig's teenage son Joe at the time. And after Kurt passed away, he did everything he could to look after Joe Hennig, and even helped him get into the WWE. And Joe Hennig had a really successful run in the WWE as Curtis Axel 10 years later after this happened. So yeah, he did well, and Brock made sure he looked after him. But on this flight, Kurt Hennig was fucking with Brock Lesnar, and they kind of weren't friends for a little bit. Matt Hardy is quoted as saying, "When it comes to the plane ride from hell, my most fond memory that I can say, which won't get me in trouble one way or the other, because it's a lot of shit, is that I remember sitting talking with Undertaker, being right by that emergency exit. Kurt Hennig was being hilarious," Hardy said. "He just kept with Brock saying, 'Look, I'm sorry I did this. I'm sorry I'm constantly ribbing you.' He said, 'Hey, can we make it okay? Here, shake my hand, Brock. Let's shake hands like men.' And I remember Kurt Hennig stomped on his toes the second he grabbed his hand. And he had on shoes, and Brock had bare feet." He's still fucking with him, and it's Brock Lesnar. So Brock and Kurt got to a point where they were like, they challenged each other to an amateur wrestling match.
On the plane?
On the plane. It's taken off at this point, in the middle of the open floor. And this isn't, Kurt Angle, who's 6 foot tall, Vince McMahon, who's like 6'1". This is Brock Lesnar, who's 6'4" and 300 pounds. Kurt Hennig, who's 6'4" and 250 pounds. Significantly bigger guys.
Just knocking the plane around the sky. Good gosh.
Well, it started when it started. What started as a friendly amateur wrestling style takedown tussle after Kurt insisted he was a better grappler than the younger Brock, quickly turned into more of a stand-up wrestling, collar and elbow thing, and then just a full-on fight that spilled out all over the rest of the plane as they brawled through the aisles. And according to Just Incredible, who was also on this flight, great name, love the name, they weren't fighting at first, but they're very competitive. So they're just scraping along, like messing around. Then something happened where it got serious. It didn't come to blows, but you know, the opening they have on planes, those openings are the emergency exit rows. Now Brock's a wrestling shooter and Kurt's a shooter kind of too. So they took it seriously. They didn't want to give in to each other. Then it went then they went at it so hard that Brock Lesnar shot in and picked up Kurt Hennig and drove him so hard into the side of the plane that they almost popped open the emergency exit 30,000 feet in the air.
Oh, that would suck.
He picked up Kurt Hennig and slammed him into the emergency exit while they're in flight. People, among them David Finlay, Triple H, and Paul Heyman, had to separate them and calm everyone down because some people, including flight attendants, had started screaming for their lives.
You think? Oh, you're gonna knock them out of the sky.
This giant human being has just thrown another giant human being into a fucking emergency exit door. And yeah, that's pretty fucking serious. X-Pac said that obviously WWE management made a big deal out of the fucking door. It's impossible for it to open at that altitude, so it's really stupid. The flight before, Vince and Kurt had a takedown tournament in the aisles, but as soon as it happened with Kurt Hennig and Brock Lesnar, they made a big deal out of it. I actually think it's more serious than that, Sean.
Well, who says it can't open at that altitude?
And right, and like we've seen all this shit with Boeing recently, like bits of the planes not working the way they're supposed to. I feel like it might be able to at least rupture.
I think he's got faith in a bad theory.
I think he's like, pressure's going to keep it in place. It'll be fine. No, I think that fucker's swinging open.
Yeah, it's going to explode the plane in half, maybe. Also, could be a thing.
Brock Lesnar lands on his feet and only loses 25% energy on that one. It kind of gets a little less funny now. Next up, depending on your point of view, is the most serious criminal offense that takes place on the flight. The flight has now it's now been going for 2 hours, and everyone was either high or incredibly drunk. And Ric Flair, who was notorious for drinking constantly, like he wakes up and drinks and goes to bed and drinks, and drinks in his sleep, and had a massive series of heart attacks and is still drinking to this day. So he had a history, a notorious history, right back until his college days, for stripping completely naked and then walking around in nothing but his sequined robe that he wears to the ring. He did exactly that on this flight. Immediately after the emergency door had nearly popped open, he jumped out of the bathroom, stark bollock naked except for his sequined robe. And the boys were screaming at him and like encouraging him, and they were like, "Oh, it's Rick! Look, it's Rick being Rick." Bear in mind, he's 53 years old at this point. It's kind of weird. He strutted up and down the plane, exposing himself to literally everyone because he's flashing as well, and helicoptering his penis in front of multiple people because, of course, he is. It's Ric Flair. Yeah.
He's just trying to bring down the tension from everybody almost dying.
Everyone almost dying. I kind of think that's it. And actually, more times than is normal for human behavior that happens in this flight, something serious happens, and then someone tries to bring the tension down, but actually makes it worse. So where it goes from Ric Flair, funny, drunk, silly old fella who's been doing this for 40 years, is where two flight attendants, Tarolyn Capilano and Heidi Doyle, would compile their allegations into a 2004 lawsuit against Ric Flair and the WWE. Chief among them chronicled misdeeds of Flair's sexual aggression. He wore nothing but a jeweled cape, the flight attendant said, and flashed his nakedness spinning his male part around. He separately cornered the women in crew-only areas of the plane, grabbed each of the women's hand and placed it on his exposed crotch, and then forcibly detained and restrained Doyle from leaving the back of the gallery of the airplane where he sexually assaulted her. That's the allegation.
You can't do that.
Yeah, that's a whole other level of like, oh, he's walking around naked. That's weird. And then it's like this. That's, yeah.
Well, there goes the hilariousness.
Yeah, it's suddenly taken a turn for the dark. Flair would later insist that there was no truth to these incidents, though the WWE eventually settled out of court with both women to the tune of several $1 million.
To be fair, if you're going to get naked and helicopter your penis at people, you got to make sure they're on board first.
Yeah, you kind of have
just on board the plane.
Yeah, and you can't just go, I'm Ric Flair, this is what I do. I whip my cock out in front of random people.
Right.
You kind of have to know that this is an event where helicoptering your penis is part of the planned sequence of events for the evening.
Ideally, you have them sign a waiver.
Yep, you have them say it on a police body cam that they're okay with this. Yeah, it's not a good look. Ric Flair kept his job after this and didn't face any fines or suspensions, but we'll get to the stuff afterwards. Also implicated in the lawsuit immediately after this Ric Flair incident was Dustin Rhodes, aka Goldust, who, according to attendant Taralyn Capilano, told her, "You and I are gonna fuck." But it wasn't until Rhodes managed to get control of the plane's PA system to start singing an awkward, slurred serenade to his ex-wife Terry Runnels, who was also on the flight, that things got out of control. Yeah. So he's got a whole
Jerry Springer flight.
It fucking is. You are so beautiful. So he did that for like about 2 minutes, and of course the boys are cheering him on, but management is now getting really concerned with trying to bring down a flight by wrestling through an emergency exit, an old fella's whipping his cock out around the place, and now this drunk enormous man is trying to serenade his ex-wife while sexually harassing a flight attendant. It's getting bad.
Wow.
By now, management is starting to get really angry with what's happening, and a furious president of talent relations and lead commentator, Jim Ross, enforced his authority to shut Goldust down and reprimanded him for his behavior by holding the speaker of the PA system down and just screaming at him so everyone on the plane could hear him getting absolutely bollocked. So, yeah. Dustin, what the fuck are you doing, you stupid, like that sort of thing.
So public
humiliation, basically.
Yeah.
Jim Ross has had enough. He's like, control yourself, man. Sit down, sober up, drink some coffee. What is wrong with you? You're a grown man. As Jim Ross
said, if any of you others...
Yeah, like he's lost his cool. Jim Ross is known for having like a little bit of a temper, and management is starting to get a little bit worried now. It's not even the worst. The worst is yet to come. As Jim Ross is screaming at Goldust, a far more serious situation was developing with Scott Hall. Just Incredible remembers that after Hall's shaving foam prank earlier on, he very quickly became out of his mind, completely out of his mind, shimmying, shaking, and barely able to stand. So those needles from earlier on, maybe something to do with this. I don't know for sure, but he's at least completely hammered. So,
that's like, you're not going to speculate?
I don't want to speculate. He's not normal drunk, is what the implication is here. Scott Hall was known for being quite a serious alcoholic. In fact, at the time when he re-signed with WWE, he was taking medicine that meant that if he had any alcohol in his system, it would make him violently sick.
Okay.
So, yeah, but it clearly wasn't working. In the harassment allegations, flight attendant Doyle claims that Hall slobbered on her face before telling her he wanted to lick her pussy. Yeah, he told Capilano to suck his dick, and then he passed out so deeply, in fact, that people had to check his pulse to see if he was still alive.
Oh my goodness.
That's not normal drunk.
Wow.
Yeah. Credible goes on to say, I had to babysit Scott Hall. I had to stay straight because everyone else was so fucked up. I sat with him throughout the entire flight and made sure he was breathing and had a pulse at all times. Imagine having to do that for your buddy. Like, that's fucked up, man. Yeah. Later, when he got off the flight, I had to get a wheelchair and roll him through customs at JFK. He was non-responsive. I remember Jim Ross sitting in baggage claim with his briefcase, just shaking his head in disdain, with that look of disgust. And I'm just standing there shrugging and pointing at Scott. That's sad.
Yeah. Man.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, Scott Hall was up there with Jake the Snake Roberts as one of those people in wrestling who was like a notorious addict. And people were like, how is he still alive? And then, God bless his soul, Diamond Dallas Page, DDP, took him in after he'd taken in Jake Roberts and got him clean for like the first time in 20 years, helped Scott Hall lose a bunch of weight, got him clean and sober for the Hall of Fame. And he managed to live a few more years in relative peace until he passed away from a coronary at the age of 62. So God bless DDP. He's gotten so many wrestlers, uninjured because they have horrific long-term back and like hip injuries from all of the wrestling, but also off drugs and clean and sober. Like Jake Roberts is sober to this day as a result of DDP's intervention. And that man like saw his sister get murdered, was like saw his other sister get horrifically sexually assaulted by his father, was born because his father was dating his grandmother at the time and did something to her daughter. And that's how Jake was conceived. Jake had a fuck. Yeah. And Scott Hall, the reason he drank when he was working as a bodyguard not a bodyguard, a bouncer in a nightclub, a guy showed up with a gun after an argument with his girlfriend. Scott Hall, as the bouncer, tried to wrestle the gun away from him. The gun went off and he shot this guy. So, yeah, Scott Hall had a self-defense death on his conscience, and Jake the Snake Roberts had one of the most horrific childhoods of any human being in history. Like, really horrible stuff. And they were both horrific addicts, and DDP got them clean in 6 months when they were well into their 50s.
Wow.
Yeah, that guy is a fucking genius. If you're ever struggling for physical or addiction issues, DDP yoga, man, it seems to work really, really well.
So get after it.
Yeah.
Is that available? Can you just reach out to him and be like, man?
He's got the thing called the Accountability Ranch where he takes people into his house and just like gets them clean. Yeah.
Huh.
Teaches them how to cook food and stuff. It's amazing. Like, there's a bunch of documentaries on YouTube. Just type in like DDP accountability or DDP Jake Roberts or DDP Scott Hall. There's a whole bunch of these stories, but it's not just these guys. Like a veteran from the Iraq War couldn't walk properly. And he started doing DDP yoga, and a year later, he'd lost a bunch of weight. He could walk again. He could run again. Really amazing stuff. And it's all just resistance-based yoga. So
it's super interesting.
It's really cool guy. Love DDP. He's just one of the best human beings to ever come out of wrestling. Anyway, back to this horrible flight. Many of the people on the flight who were still sober, basically anyone who wasn't a wrestler, had pretty much had enough of the behavior at this point and began to complain to management, who were taking notes and seriously trying to calm everyone down, except for one member of management, former Fabulous Freebirds wrestler Michael P.S. Hayes. Big name in the 70s and 80s, the Fabulous Freebirds. They kind of revolutionized wrestling. They were the first wrestling act to have intro music. And they came down to Freebird by Lynyrd Skynyrd. So that was their intro music. Smart.
On the nose with that name.
Yeah, it works. But Michael P.S. Hayes was always had a problem with drugs and drink. He wanted to be a rock star. He could never be a rock star because he wasn't that talented musically. But just Incredible remembers that Michael Hayes was getting really bad. He got a lot of heat anyway with the boys. Nobody liked him. And now he was drunk. Rowdy as fuck, like being a dick, loud, and obnoxious. Michael Hayes was part of the creative team. He was also a notorious racist. He racially abused Mark Henry to his face, and Mark Henry nearly killed him. The world's strongest man, Mark Henry, nearly threw him like out a plate glass window, and that was when he was finally suspended, Michael P.S. Hayes. And he had huge alcohol problems, as seen on this flight. He was one of the first people on the flight to get drunk and immediately started antagonizing other wrestlers for no good reason. Hayes was so drunk at this point in the flight, because we're now getting towards, like, they're not too far off landing at this point. Hayes almost pissed on Linda McMahon.
Oh,
yeah, the boss's wife.
Yeah, and Vince was like, "Yeah, do it, do it."
Yeah, he was probably. He was so Hayes almost pissed on Linda McMahon. He was all fucked up, trying to whip his dick out, stooped over, tugging at his trouser zipper. He doesn't know it's Linda. He thinks he's in the fucking bathroom.
This toilet's weird looking, man.
Why does this toilet have a senator's haircut? That's so weird. He's like, wait a minute. He just keeps saying, wait a minute, over and over again. And finally, Vince is like, he's going to piss on my wife. What is happening? So Vince led him away and sat him back down in the seat and told him to get his shit together. This guy's supposed to be part of management. He's not supposed to be doing this. Nearly pissed on a billionaire boss's wife mid-flight. When he got back to his seat, he noticed that John Bradshaw Layfield, who is also a massive asshole, but is massive. You wouldn't fuck with this guy. He's 6'6" and 250 odd pounds. Was passed out drunk not too far from him. Bradshaw had been cut open hard way, which means by accident. Normally wrestlers have like surreptitiously taken bits of razor blades, tiny little bits of razor blades, and just like do little cuts in their hairline to get blood. And they've usually taken an aspirin or two beforehand, so the blood will flow really freely because their blood's quite thin. When you get cut open hard way, it means you've like hit your head off the ring steps or a barricade or something like that, and it's just you've busted wide open. And JBL the previous night had been cut open hard way in an accident in a match with X-Pac at the pay-per-view, and as a result, after the match, had to go to the local hospital and get stitched up. He had 8 stitches in his head. Ouch. At the time. Yeah, and he was bandaged right the way around, wearing a suit with a massive bandage around his head. Hayes walked up to Layfield, who was asleep, screamed, "Wake up, you big fucking redneck," and punched him right on his bandage. Yeah,
what the fuck?
That's not smart. JBL, who had been drunk, shot up out of his seat, realized his wound had reopened, and there was blood now pouring down his incredibly expensive suit. Was so angry, he punched Michael Hayes with an uppercut and just knocked him out.
And then threw him out of the plane.
Almost. Get out of my fucking plane. No, it wasn't quite that. He realized he actually had to be held back as well. He realized that he was fucking with management and he could lose his job. So he grabbed Michael Hayes, sat him down in his seat, this unconscious drunk man, and himself went back to sleep while he was still bleeding everywhere. That's so gross. Michael Hayes was having a really bad time, but it wasn't over for him yet, despite the fact he's now unconscious and drunk and nearly pissed on the boss's wife. Sean X-Pac Waltman recounts, so Hayes is out cold, and he's got that fucking thing in a fucking ponytail, that blonde mullet. You know, he was still rocking the mullet, and it's 2002. And I said, somebody get me a pair of scissors.
Oh, no.
I remember Jerry the King Lawler over at the side just giggling. Everybody is like, no, you're not going to do it. You're not brave enough. I grabbed those scissors like I was pulling out taped brass knuckles out of my tights like this. Oh, like that, like making a big show out of it. I over-exaggeratedly reached down the front of my jeans and everybody's looking and they don't think I'm going to do it. I grabbed that fucking rat tail. I lift it up and I just went whack, chops it off, and the whole plane just erupted with screams and laughter and cheers.
Oh boy.
Michael Hayes is still unconscious at this point. Michael Hayes was so drunk and embarrassed that when the plane landed and there's a bunch of sore heads at this point. Michael Hayes didn't realize what had happened because he's now got a bit of a concussion. He's drunk. He's hungover. He's just been told he nearly pissed on Linda McMahon. He's not having a great day. He didn't realize what happened to him until he got off the plane and landed back in the States. Justin Credible said, "I'd never seen anyone who is so drunk and pilled up look at himself as we're going through the security and saw the mirror's reflection. It was like something out of a movie. He went, sleepily raises his hand and to fluff the back of his hair, only to find that there's nothing there. He popped out like a stone cold sober motherfucker. And this is going through customs. Now Michael Hayes, he's fucking red. He wants to fight the people in customs. You're talking US agents. He starts swinging wildly. And he keeps asking, who did this? Who fucking did this? Nobody stooges X-Pac out. Nobody snitches on him because nobody liked Michael Hayes.
Ha ha.
That's Vince McMahon had to intervene at this point, like run over and stop Michael Hayes from being arrested in airport by security people because he's throwing a full-on fit at this point and he stinks of alcohol.
Well, that's when you got to be like, Michael. Right after you were trying to piss on my wife, you went in the bathroom and cut your hair. I don't know what the fuck you were doing.
Right after that moment that I probably would have enjoyed, this happened to you. So Hayes was furious for hours after this. Like they got out of JFK, he went back to the hotel, and he's still like, he's walking up and down the corridors. He's like knocking on people's doors. Who fucking did this? Who took my hair? He calmed down eventually that night. And the next night is Monday. It's Monday Night Raw. And they're at the Raw taping. He arrives backstage as a producer, hungover as fuck, and goes over to the notice board so that he can see the running order for tonight's like card, like interview, match number 1. This person's winning with this, and interview 2. So he's looking to see what the segments are, and notices that somebody has posted his disgusting Tennessee waterfall and stapled it to the board. They kept his mullet and then pinned it to the fucking board so that he could see it. I posted it on the wall at TV the next day, remembers X-Pac. That's fucked up, man.
Oh, but
my hair.
That's way worse than them drawing a dick on your face when you fall asleep.
Way worse. Like, that was his thing. This like 50-year-old man with his like dyed bleach blonde ponytail thing. It's like, it's like cutting Samson's hair. Like, don't take the man's mane. That was all he had left of his pride. Anyway, after a period of being on the outs with the company, Dustin Rhodes was eventually dropped Goldust by WWE in late 2003, partially because of this incident on the plane where he's like trying to serenade his ex-wife. He eventually returned to the company years later, and he's still wrestling now. He's 55. Ooh. And yeah, he's working in AEW. He's a trainer most of the time, but he still wrestles part-time. He's in great shape because that guy had some incredibly dark days. He had huge issues with drugs, and now he is clean and sober, and he's looking really good. So yeah, Dustin Rhodes is looking great. His younger brother Cody is currently WWE champion. So, and yeah, did it all in honor of their dad Dusty. So yeah,
sweet.
Yeah. Not to return, however, was the all-time great and posthumous Hall of Famer Kurt Hennig. He was seemingly held solely accountable for the aircraft door incident with Brock Lesnar, and shortly after Hennig was released from his WWE contract, he never returned to the company, and he died from acute cocaine intoxication a year later. That's pretty bad.
Yeah.
You don't hear of many people dying from cocaine use these days, but that happened in 2002.
It's usually when you hear the cocaine, it's like, oh, they had fentanyl in it.
Yeah. It's like it's a concoction of stuff, or like it's laced with something, or it's really low grade stuff. Maybe there's like shit in there that shouldn't be, but yeah, acute cocaine intoxication, and he was dead at 44 the next year. As Hennig and Rhodes' contracts were headed for the shredder, so too was Scott Hall's. His release was announced too, just days after the plane ride from hell, though his poor physical shape during the tour was also cited as cause for his severance. He would sign shortly after then with then debuting NWA TNA promotion, which birthed a bunch of famous wrestlers. Jim Ross has been quoted as saying, "There was just such a lack of respect on the flight. We had made significant changes because of it. Guys lost their jobs and it hurt people's reputations. They acted so wrong. We couldn't do business with people like that, and we had to rebuild our locker room afterwards. The bottom line is, I was very upset in how the talent conducted themselves. We made mistakes from a management standpoint. We'd wanted to make the trip as comfortable as possible, so we chartered a sports plane with first-class seats and upgraded all of the food so that they could keep their calorie counts up. But the open bar was obviously a mistake. It went off the no shit. It went off the rails with a small group of guys, 30 or so, and then just went crazy. It's still a black eye to be affiliated with the plane ride from hell." That's 25 years later. So
yeah. Whoop.
What?
That wasn't supposed to go there.
we're doing Pulp Fiction now.
Yeah. Sorry. That wasn't supposed to pop up yet. I was just thinking of that Dusty Rhodes when he was doing the thing, and then Jim Ross came on and was yelling at him with it overwords, and then I figured that popped into my head, that scene from Pulp Fiction where they jumped up and yelled at everybody about, if any of you guys move. Like, I just figured that's what he was thinking and wanted to say.
It pretty much was that. And like, Jim Ross is a guy, like, he loses his temper, but he's a small oldish man. Like, he wasn't someone that would normally shout at people, but he was so fucking angry that he lost it on that flight.
If he would have lost it all the way, maybe it would have saved some stuff.
Like crazy. Like, if he'd shut it down and got on the PA system and said, if anybody does anything else on this flight, you're getting fired, and I have the power to do that because I'm head of talent relations, then maybe you wouldn't have had all this shit. But like 6 or 7 major incidents on this flight, a bunch of people lost their jobs, and I just wondered what you thought of the plane ride from hell.
It is insane. Like, not like, I don't even know. Penises twirling about.
Wrestlers flying into emergency exits.
Yeah. Well, I had so many ideas early on. I was like, oh, you know what a great pay-per-view would be is if you set up a ring in like a plane and just had them wrestle it out, like had some matches while it was flying around. That would be sick.
That nearly happened. So a Japanese wrestling promotion called DDT, who are known for doing like crazy gimmicky stuff, did an entire multi-man tag team match on a train between one station to another. Yeah, and they've got like people on the train and they're doing a full wrestling match. It's hilarious. And also there was one match where in DDT where one of their wrestlers, they were wrestling on an athletics field, and one of the wrestlers had set up like 3 hurdles in a row, and his opponent was behind the hurdles, so he jumped the 3 hurdles and then drop kicked his opponent. It's just the most, one of those weird things. And then also you've got death matches where like involving barbed wire and glass and explosions and shit. And there was one that happened in the middle of a swimming pool with alligators at the side.
Oh goodness. Well, now I want one with a cage with alligators on a plane while it's flying, doing the vomit rocket thing.
We probably got close. Like these hardcore death matches in Japan were drawing like 40,000 people to Kawasaki Stadium and like the Tokyo Dome and things like that. So we weren't far off. But the plane ride from hell was its own like special thing. And I don't really know who you rank on this, but I think in terms of, I think the fault's really with management. Yeah, because you can't give wrestlers an open bar. Like it's just crazy.
That's who I'm ranking here today, is the person that was like, you know what we should do? Open bar, man.
Yeah. And like also like the other way you do it and I understand everyone's frustrated. No one likes having their flight delayed, especially if you've had like a really long fucking trip and you've had other hassle and maybe you're not feeling your best because you're injured or whatever. These people are flying first class. You're feeding them like 6,000 calories a day on these flights, and they've got really comfortable seating. I think you say, listen, we're really sorry. We'll give you all one drink. And if they're still complaining after that, you just say, fucking suck it up. You're going to pay tens of thousands of dollars to do this shit. Calm down, you know?
Yeah.
Give them one drink. Give them some champagne to calm them down. Don't open the fucking bar and then, like the needles thing, that was so fucked.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so for whoever it was that was like open bar, you get a 90.
Yeah. Like, you could have killed people. Like, people could have legitimately died on this fucking flight. So
yeah, and
crazy.
No, nah, yeah, Vince wasn't trying to stop him from peeing on her.
No, he wasn't. He was probably like, "Oh, I want to see where this goes."
Maybe that's where it started.
Yeah, maybe that's where it is. The Bobby Lashley took. No, Michael Hayes' penis. But yeah, it's so weird because I think a lot of this is cultural at the time. Like, they were just like, oh, let the boys mess around. Let everyone let them have some fun. But actually, this plane ride was like the kind of the apex of the misbehaving. And after that, they introduced like wellness policies and stuff. After Eddie Guerrero died, and they started to take people's health seriously. They started offering anyone who'd ever worked for the WWE in any capacity was given a free ride if they needed to go to rehab, which I think is a really cool thing. They still do that to this day. No matter how unpopular you are with the company, if you need to go to rehab, you can go to rehab. And I think Scott Hall went 9 times on the company's dime. Yeah.
He should probably pick a better rehab.
Yeah, I don't know if they did, and all he needed was DDP. He just needed his mate to take him in and go, "Let me show you how to make pizzas properly."
Now, if you have to keep going back to rehab, and you keep going to the same rehab,
it's not working. It's a holiday for you at that point, basically. So, but it's kind of an amazing event. I think it's a turning point for wrestling because I've heard a bunch of stories since then of people who have gone back to the WWE and they're like, it's such a different locker room now. Everyone's really friendly. Everyone's family orientated. People bring their like wife and kids to these events, and we're not working 300 days a year. We're only doing like 3 days a week. We're not traveling as intensely. We're getting paid more. We're getting our physical therapy looked after now that Vince is gone. And there's even rumors that they might get their medical insurance paid, which, given that they're classed as independent contractors but aren't allowed to work for anyone else, I think would be a good thing. But the incidents like this needed to happen for that culture to die.
Yeah. Well, this is about the same time where stuff like the Minnesota Vikings sex boat happened.
That's right. I remember that. That was fucking dark.
God.
You kind of...
Athletes were partying.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure they still are. And then you got like the Tiger Woods thing, he was kind of going off the rails. And yeah, I feel like those days are long gone now, because in the age of social media, everyone has a camera. Everyone can take a picture of you drunkenly stumbling around an airplane, helicoptering your dick around, and it's not going to look good. So I feel like the early 2000s, you heard a lot of stories like this. I don't know if we reacted the way we should have done at the time, but it's interesting that a wrestling promotion afterwards immediately started firing people and putting a bunch of policies in place that not a lot of other organizations did in 2002. So it's a good thing. And now we're at a stage where that would not happen. People would be gone forever, really, at that point.
See, and that's funny. Like, I guess maybe you would call that cancel culture, but I mean, I call that like a growth and evolution as a society and civilization.
Yeah.
Which my boss would say it doesn't happen.
Yeah. I would say that because Ric Flair, when nobody knew about the court cases at the time and the settlements. People heard about Ric Flair walking around the flight and whipping his cock around the place and saying to people going, "Hey, look at my penis." Everyone thought it was that. Nobody heard about him cornering people and making them touch him stuff.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah, and when that came out, Ric Flair lost a bunch of endorsement opportunities, and he was brought into AEW for like one appearance, and people were really angry about that, and he's not been back since. So I feel like, yeah, you can say cancel culture and people getting canceled for stuff 20 years later, but actually he's being held accountable for stuff that he wasn't at the time, and I'm kind of okay with that. However, this is more of an evolution as opposed to canceling, because could you imagine if we were still having like every year, if we had a plane ride from hell, like it would be really crazy.
Well, see, that's the thing. Maybe we just learn and stop doing bad behavior. Oh, that's what we do here.
That's what we're all about. And actually, the interesting thing is a lot of the people involved in this had redemption arcs afterwards. Scott Hall got clean eventually before he passed away. Dustin Rhodes got clean, and he's still wrestling to this day. Ric Flair is somehow still alive. So
win.
It's a win of sorts, and Brock Lesnar is healthy, and a lot of these people, other than unfortunately Kurt Hennig, who's actually remembered really fondly. Like, okay, he died of cocaine intoxication, and he was a bit of a ribber, but actually most people loved that guy. So I feel like people learned from this, not just because they were fired and because it's become big headlines, but also because they realized they had to grow up eventually, and they weren't going to live forever, and it did change a lot of things. So from that perspective, I'm glad that those lessons were learned from the plane ride from hell. But from a storytelling perspective, it's one of the most insane moments in all of aviation history, I would say. I can't imagine too many plane rides that have ever been as crazy as that.
No, not like commercial, but like private planes.
Yeah,
I mean, like
possibly. Yeah, God knows what's happening on chartered flights these days, but that's pretty for a Boeing 747 to nearly fall out of the sky because Brock Lesnar nearly spears a man through the door. That's pretty fucking wild.
See, that's what I see. Even like not spearing him through the door, just slam into the side of the plane, and it just like skids
it would knock it.
Yeah.
The pilot's like, "What the fuck? That was the turbulence. Did we hit a bird? What the fuck was that?" So could you imagine if that was like the guy who landed the plane in the Hudson? It was like, "Oh, bird strike. We've got to land in the Hudson River. What's his name? Sully." And he was like, "It wasn't bird strike. These two fucking enormous wrestlers having a fight at the back of the plane. I had to bring it down safely." Boy. That'd be hilarious. But yeah, honestly, really interesting story. I'm glad that people have learned from it. And if you do get an opportunity to watch Dark Side of the Ring, because it's a great documentary series, a lot of the stuff they cover on there, but particularly the plane ride from hell, it's fascinating in a kind of a fucked up way. Give it a watch. So that's our show for this. I had a lot of fun researching this one. I'm glad I covered it because it's kind of crazy. I learned a lot from your story about the Miranda guy.
Yeah, sure. and if you want to go hunt some ghosts and maybe talk through a spirit box to Ernesto Miranda down there on Monroe, you can take that ghost tour. Get Ghosted Phoenix. I found him on Instagram, and
that's in Mesa, right?
It's in Phoenix. They take you on a walking tour at night, and you play with ghost hunting equipment and check out these old houses and learn about the history of downtown Phoenix and the area and where people got stabbed and stuff too. Yeah.
Wow.
It's pretty cool. And the hosts and the tour guides and stuff, the stories, they're awesome. It's fun.
I kind of like walking tours. I've done a few of them, like around London and Bath and places in Italy and stuff like that. I really, really enjoy them. So yeah, really go for that, especially if it's a ghost tour, because it's kind of more fun that way. Sense.
It was. We were outside like St. Mary's Basilica in Phoenix, and the little ghost spirit box thing was calling me names.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I think it was somebody on the other end, like saying them though.
You look like you're in the Jersey Shore. That's amazing. Yeah, so yeah, definitely get down to Phoenix and do that. And that's a really cool local story. I really liked hearing about Miranda. So if you guys would like more amazing behind the scenes stuff from our personal lives and also exclusive podcast episode footage and free gifts and a bunch of other stuff, go to patreon.com/history's greatest idiots and you'll get a yearly extra bonus present as well, because we're doing those at the moment. Also give us a follow over on Instagram at History's Greatest Idiots. Same thing on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and look for at History's Greatest Idiots, you can find all of our videos there as well. And thank you all to our wonderful patrons, who I forgot to name, so I'll name them now. Jesse Christ, Kimberly Johnson, Andrew Zavara, and Dilly Bob. Thank you all for supporting us so much. It was wonderful sending you gifts, and there'll be more on their way soon. So we'll be back very soon with a bunch more episodes. But until then, Derek, would you like to say goodbye?
Bye, everybody.
And we'll see you all again very soon. Take care now. Bye.